Alrighty folks, and welcome to the Chronicler podcast channel. Episode 10, the Spring and Autumn period, between the years 771 to 476 BC, also known as Qinqiu Shidai. So here we are, episode 10. It's a nice feeling, to be honest. I've finally hit 10 episodes, and I must say I am very thankful for all of the responses to the podcasts I have made so far. They have been great, and I really appreciate the feedback as well. Please feel free to share the podcast with others, as it will help the channel to grow even bigger. As well as that, if you are listening on Apple Podcasts, make sure to leave a cheeky wee review if you get the chance. It will help the channel to get discovered. My first question when reading about this was, why is it called the Spring and Autumn period? Why not the Civil War period? But the reason behind it was that the state of Lu called it Qinqiu, which literally means spring and autumn, because each entry started with the season. So there you go. That's the reason why. The tiny state of Lu are extremely important in this. Not because they emerged victorious militarily, but because it is only their record of the period that seems to have survived. And apparently, these texts were edited by Confucius himself. So if you go to read these annals, you will be reading the penmanship of the great Confucius. Of course, to do this, you would need to be able to read very old Chinese, which not a lot of people can do today, even on the mainland. But still, it's kind of cool that you can read his own writing from 3,000 years ago. Most other sources we have were written after the event, from different scholars who wanted to find out just what the hell happened in this time. As much as modern scholars are thankful for this, it just isn't quite the same as genuine primary sources. Now you may be wondering, what happened to the rest of the documents? Surely there must have been an abundance of literary sources. You would be correct in assuming this. But unfortunately, a particular emperor, who we will talk about soon, didn't like these books. And I will leave it at that. Sorry for being such a tease. So the Spring and Autumn period was a time of total chaos. And to analyse it historically, it also is a mess. I reckon that if I were to go fully into depth into the Spring and Autumn period, I'd still be doing this podcast 10 years later. No joke. There are so many stories surrounding this period. For example, the exploits of noblemen, tales of undying loyalty, heart-wrenching betrayals, romance, war, and even more war. This was a time of great struggle though, but it did inspire great philosophy as well. The Spring and Autumn period gave rise to so many philosophies, and that's where we get the name the 100 Schools of Thought. There were that many. Now you could see why I would be stuck in this period like the marshy swamp it sounds like, just to get through the philosophies inspired during the time. That would take another 100 episodes. And then if you want to mix that in with all of the conflicts and the political backstabbing, nah, I've not got time for that. The different philosophies though will get their own episodes in this podcast, but only the biggest influencers, not all of them. The thing is as well, every time I read a new article for this time, I find new information. Literally every single time I do some extra research on this topic, or if I buy a new Chinese historical book, I learn something new. The problem is as well that I haven't really found a Western book that really dives deep into this period of time. The scholars' books who I have read barely dip their toe into the vast ocean that is the Spring and Autumn period. Now, this isn't a criticism. It's easy to see why. Firstly, due to the contents you need to speak of, and secondly, because of the varying accounts on each source of information. So my impression is always, oh yeah, the spring and autumn period. That kind of happened. Oh, Confucius. Let's dive into his life. So last time, I mentioned how and why the social order or governmental order of the Zhou dynasty broke down. Now, during this time, the state of Zhou still existed, but it was merely a figurehead. The Zhou kings were puppets who danced on the strings of the most powerful states around them. This was a time of violence, a lot of violence. All you need to know is that basically, as social order began to break down, more and more people declared themselves as kings. There are even cases of just a village leader declaring himself as a king. I guess you can say that leading up to this, the Zhou was a very precarious piece of thin ice that was beginning to crack and splinter. The spring and autumn period is finally when the ice shattered. The people on the top of the ice were plunged into chaos and madness afterwards. The Zhou, after that idiot king who kept lighting the signal fires, moved their capital east to Luoyang and tried to re-establish their power. But they would never rise to the prominence that they once enjoyed. And it became clear that the Zhou were weaker than their vassals. The power vacuum was open. Who's going to fill it? The answer to that was, well, everyone. Everyone thought they could fill up this power vacuum and started governing themselves more autonomously, preparing for war with their neighbours at the same time. There were so many states popping up everywhere, and I will mention the map of Zhou China in 519 BC. So in the Central Plains, you have the Zhou, located in Luoyang, the Cheng, the Song, the Zheng, the Chen, the Shu, and the Shai. Northern states consisted of the Jin, the Yan, the Qi, the Lu, and the Wei. To the west, you have the state of Qin, who were almost considered barbarians at the time, considering how far west they were. And to the south, you have the semi-barbarian states of Chu, Wu, and Yin. Now, I'm not going to lie, there was plenty more states, but this is what the map shows. So you just need to go with that just now. All you need to know is that social order broke down, everyone's fighting, everyone wants more territory. That's it. Now, because this was a time of war, there were a lot of rules on how to engage in warfare. And one of the big things was the idea that you better make a sacrifice. And I'm not talking about one, but a lot. Before the campaign starts, sacrifice. Traveling to enemy territory? Sacrifice. The day before a battle? Sacrifice. The day of a battle? Sacrifice. Aftermath of the battle? Sacrifice. You get the idea. Now, it wasn't human sacrifices. It would be counterproductive if you killed a chunk of your army before you even met the enemy. But these sacrifices did serve a purpose. It was to please heaven and the ancestors. And you better make sure heaven's on your side, otherwise you will lose the upcoming battle or the campaign. As well as that, it was customary for the commanders to give an oath before the battle begun. This oath was called a shu, and it was between the commander, his lord, and of course, heaven. Every shu pretty much followed this pattern. The commander would start off with the crimes of the army's enemies, a usurper or just the fact that they are bad. They would then go on to mention that he is of no particular talent, but heaven has chosen him to lead the army. He then tells his army how they should conduct themselves in battle, from which if they disobey, how they will be punished, and finally, how they would be rewarded if they obeyed and won the battle. An example of one can be found when a commander named Zhao Yan for the state of Jin declared his oath to his army before a battle against the Fan and the Zhonhan states. The quote goes as follows. The Fan and Zhou lineages have gone against the mandate of heaven, slaughtered the people, and seek to tyrannize Jin state and slay its lord. Our lord relied on Zhou to protect him, but now Zhou has betrayed him. They cast off the lord and aid his rebel servants. But in this battle, we follow heaven's mandate, obey the command of our lord, restore the potency of duty, and eradicate the shame of our state. For one who conquers the enemy, is if he is a higher minister, he will receive a large district, and if he is a lower minister, he will receive a lower district. If he is a noble, he will receive 100,000 mo, so that is 100,000 times 666 square meters of land. If he is a farmer, a merchant, an artisan, he will be permitted to service at court. If he is a slave or bound to menial service, he shall be freed. Should I commit no crime, then the Lord will consider how to reward me. Should I be guilty, then may I be punished by strangulation. May I only have a thin coffin with no outside layers. May it be drawn by an ununiformed horse and wagon. And may I not be buried in the graveyard of my lineage. So, from the quote, you can see how Zhao Yang followed the customs of the day. He just didn't mention how he was of no talent. Apparently, he didn't need to, because by all accounts, he won the battle. And to top that off, the strangulation part, that would definitely have happened if he lost the battle. Chinese commanders were always killed for failures, and quite sadly, it happened because of success at times too, which we will get into in future episodes. Clearing up the corpses and giving them a proper burial was also an important practice of the day. The dead soldiers at the end of the day also had ancestors. But there were times when people wanted to kind of pervert the practice in another way. Because the practice usually was you buried all dead. Didn't matter if they were enemies or your own men. You buried them all properly. But like I said, there was times when people wanted to pervert this. For example, the state of Chu had fought a battle with the state of Jin. Chu won the battle, and it was here one of the ministers, a man named Fan Dang, said to the king of Chu, "Why doesn't my lord build a collective tomb and gather the Jin corpses into it to make a Jin Guan?" Literally a great display. A large mound with a marker to identify it. I have heard it said that when you defeat the enemy, you must show your descendants in order that not forget the achievements or your military prowess. Now, to sum up that quote, the minister, Fan Dang, wanted to build a monument on top of a pile of enemy corpses to show off the king of Chu's military prowess. The king must have been a bit more compassionate than his advisor because he rejected the proposal, saying that this kind of practice was only for the wicked. Sadly though, it does seem like he was in the minority, with some pre-chain texts saying that the Jin Guan of numberless bones rose up like hills and mountains. Ouch. Okay, so that's one of the stories out of the way. I've got 3 more, so let's keep going. The next person I want to talk about is called Duke Huang of Qi. Duke Huang was the governor of the state of Qi. He was alive between the years 685 and 643 BC. And he was the first man to be declared as a hegemonial lord by a Zhou king. This was the highest title a king could give to a vassal. It basically meant that he could do whatever he liked, as long as he defended the Zhou from frequent barbarian raids. He had a motto, and this is it: support the king and ward off the barbarians, or in Chinese, Zun Wang Rang Yi. Zhu Huang then used this new authority to launch conquests against his neighbours. For example, he declared other Zhou vassal states, such as the Song and the Lu, as barbarians, then launched military campaigns against them, garnering even more power for himself. So you could see the neat little trick that Zhu Huang did here. Basically, because he had all of this power, and because the Zhou couldn't do anything about it, now he can declare other people as barbarians, and then he has a pretext to invade them. So yeah, that's all we could really say about Zhu Huang. Just because after Zhu Huang dies, you think that the power of the state would grow, but that didn't happen. What happens instead is that Zhu Huang then dies, obviously, and then there's a civil war between his sons within the state. So then, of course, the power of the state declines, and then there's balance to this fragile world again. So, another example of a story that I'm going to go into is about a man called Jade Zetwa, and this is a story of undying loyalty and quite grotesque cooking methods, to say the least. Now, before I start, I just want to say I couldn't find the date of birth for this guy, so I guess all you need to know is that he was born during the spring and autumn period. That lovely time of chaos. So Jade Zetwa grew up in the Han state during this time, but in his adult life, he served the state of Jin as a minister. The state of Jin at the time was located in what is today's Shanxi province, and they were pretty much like the frontier of the Zhou state. They were the shield in which defended the civilized world, or what remains of the Zhou dynasty. The man that Jade Zetwa served most prominently was the crown prince at the time. His name is Chongar. Now Chongar was a military man and frequently campaigning against his enemies. One of those said campaigns backfired spectacularly, and it was against the state of Qin to the west. You know, the guys who eventually overthrew everyone. The campaign went so badly that it was only Chongar and Jade Zetwa left trying to find their way home, and the situation looked grim for the two of them, to say the least. This is where Jade Zetwa noticed that Chongar was actually starving to death in the middle of this forest that they were trekking through. And it is here that Jade Zetwa valiantly cuts off pieces of his flesh for Chongar to eat. Now, there are two stories as to what happens next. Some say that he just shaved his skin off slightly, or like just shaved some meat off and then fed it to the emperor, or sorry, the king. Others say that he literally cut off his arm and then cooked it for him. So it's grim either way, but whatever you want to think about it, this is apparently what happened. So, with his life saved, Chongar found his way back to his capital city. And it is here that Jade Zetwa is either dismissed or he retires. So the most likely reason for him retiring is that he knows Chongar is going to be consumed with power, and he knows that power does bad things to people. So he wants to leave before he sees the ugly side of Chongar coming out. The other option is that he got kicked out. So again, two different conflicting stories. I'll let you decide which one you believe. After his dismissal or his retirement, whatever you want to call it, Jade Zetwa then retreated to the mountains of Shanxi and attempted to retire in peace. But Chongar, over the years, felt really guilty about this. So guilty that he decided that he would try to force Jade Zetwa out of the mountains if he had to. It is here that he started sending patrols around the mountains to try and find Jade Zetwa. When that failed, Chongar simply had enough and thought, I'm going to smoke him out by lighting the place on fire. Now Jade Zetwa had two options. He could come out and save his life, or he could die. He actually chose death. So after that, Chongar then felt even more guilty and told everyone that they needed to celebrate Jade Zetwa's life. And there still is a mini festival to do with this. This is why I mentioned it. So it comes just before the Tomb Sweeping Festival in China. So there's meant to be a day before where everyone celebrates the loyalty of Jade Zetwa. So yeah, there's a little fun fact for you. Now, I will wrap this off with the details of one battle. I finally managed to find details of one particular battle. Finally. This is the Battle of Cheerful, and it was fought between the states of Chu and Wu. So this is like the southeastern states of the time. The state of Chu were the invading party, and it was them, as well as subordinate states. The subordinate states made the front line, obviously. So the state of Chu basically gathered up their vassals and then marched east. To the east, the state of Wu were waiting at the foot of a hill. Now cleverly, they also hid units at the other side of the hill, out of sight from the Chu army. Once the two armies were set up, it was the state of Wu who initiated the attack. But this was a trap. After the initial attack, the men began to retreat to the base of the hill. Smelling blood, the Chu army charged forward with all speed, and it was here where the hidden enemy units around the side of the hill came around and began to flank the Chu soldiers. After that, it was game over, and from there, the Chu forces were completely routed or they were slaughtered. Now, I will leave it there, just because I can keep going on and on and on, but this has been such a drain on me to sift through all of this and find some of the best stories I could possibly find. I feel like I need to mention my three main sources of information here. The first one is Professor Kenneth J. Hammond, who gave me the great insights to China in terms of his book. I listened to his audiobook on Audible. You can also get it on the great courses. I was actually so into the book that I managed to finish it within 2 weeks. And this is a 25 chapter of the entire history of China. But it's a really good book, so I recommend it. The next is a guy called Mark Edward Lewis. And in his book, Sanctioned Violence in Early China, I found the primary source quotes of the commanders, and then of course my last resource was Google, where I did a hell of a lot of searching. Oh, actually, and this would be a good idea to thank my wife, who read Chinese sources, which are far more detailed and comprehensive than Western ones, and then translated them for me. It should be good motivation for me to learn more Chinese, but sadly, I'm really lacking on that front. Now next time, we will dive into the philosophies of the time, and we'll start with Kunzu, or what he is better known as, Confucius. Now, I hope you have enjoyed this episode, and I will see you next time on the Chronicled Podcast channel. Thanks for listening.